This is Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host, and we have got another trivia episode of something here we call true or false. To find out exactly what we're talking about, stay tuned. All right, we're ready to go. We're ready to go with a special episode of True or False, which honors the automobile industry, the wonderful world of cars. Whether you're a fan of that or not, stay tuned because I think you'll really learn some really fascinating facts. With that in mind, we'd like to acknowledge howstuffworks.com. And with that said, here is the first true or false question for your true or false consideration. And it goes like this: true or false, Henry Ford started his own motor vehicle company, his very first one, back in 1899. It was called the Detroit Automobile Company. Is this statement true or false? Henry Ford started his first motor vehicle company back in 1899. It was called the Detroit Automobile Company. What do you think? That is true. After leaving his job working for Thomas Edison, Ford started his own motor company in 1899, but he ended up dissolving it in 1901 after the vehicles it produced were way too expensive. True or false? Electric cars were common in the early 1900s. True or false? Electric cars were common in the early 1900s. Well, you know what? That's true. Henry Ford ended up buying his wife an electric car every year between 1908 and 1914. The car he bought her was called Detroit Electric. Wow, getting an electric car every year. That's pretty cool. True or false? The first car produced by Henry Ford under the Ford brand was the Model T. That actually is false, and here's why. Although Ford's Model T was his most famous car that he had created, Ford's Model A was his first. Next up, true or false, the United States is home to around a third of all cars in the world. True or false, the United States is home to around a third of all cars in the world. What do you think about that? True, or might that just be false? Well, guess what? It's false, because the USA is home to not a third of all cars in the world. The USA is home to a fourth of all cars in the world. That's a lot of cars. True or false? The one, the only Leonardo da Vinci invented the car only in drawings in around 1478. What do you think about that? The great Leonardo da Vinci, true or false, invented the car only in drawings in around 1478. That is true. As you might also know, he had amazing detailed drawings of the helicopter, of gliders, of scuba tanks and gear. Da Vinci obviously was way ahead of his time. True or false, in the 1980s, Honda became the first Japanese car maker to open a manufacturing plant in the United States. True or false, in the 1980s, Honda became the first Japanese car maker to open a manufacturing plant in the United States. As you probably know, or at least can surmise, that is true, and I truly remember that myself. Up until that point, all Japanese cars sold in the USA happened to have been imported from Japan. True or false, the much-loved Volkswagen Beetle sold over 51 million models between 1937 and 2003. True or false, the much loved Volkswagen Beetle sold over 51 million models between the years of 1937 and 2003. Well, guess what? That happens to be false because the Beetle sold over 21 million during that time, not 51 million, but 21 million is pretty cool. The very last model of the Beetle that came out probably 4 or 5 years ago, I had. It was wonderful. It was a Volkswagen Beetle Turbo, black with a spoiler and two-toned interior. It was such a wonderful car, but my lease expired and I didn't want to purchase the car. So I got another Volkswagen. I'm kind of like a Volkswagen guy. Anyway, true or false? Introduced back in 1966, the amazing Toyota Corolla has sold over 40 million units since then. True or false? Introduced back in 1966, the amazing Toyota Corolla has sold over 40 million units since then. Guess what? That's true. An amazingly successful car. True or false, America's big three automakers are Ford, Chrysler, and Chevrolet. True or false, America's big three automakers are Ford, Chrysler, and Chevrolet. That is true. True or false, Lamborghini forms part of the Volkswagen Group. Lamborghini is part of the Volkswagen Group. What do you think? True or false? Think about this. It's true. Volkswagen bought Lamborghini back in 1998. I always have to think twice before I pronounce Volkswagen because we say Volkswagen here in the States, but my folks were from Europe and my mother corrected me once. She said, Robert, it is not Volkswagen, it's Volkswagen, kind of with an F, Volkswagen. Everybody say it with me, Volkswagen, not Volkswagen. Anyway, here we go. True or false, the world, excluding America, sees around 70% of cars having manual transmissions. True or false, the world, excluding the US, sees around 70% of cars having manual transmissions. That's false. I thought it was true too, but here's why. Believe it or not, 80%, not 70% of the world's cars have manual transmissions, excluding America, of course. One of the first cars I ever had, it was a used Datsun hatchback, two-door hatchback, B210. It was a manual, and I didn't know how to drive a manual transmission. I had to have my girlfriend at the time teach me, and let's just say she was a very patient soul indeed. Next up is this. German manufacturer Volkswagen, when translated that word into English, means people's car. True or false, German manufacturer Volkswagen, when translated to English, means people's car. That is true. The government of Germany, specifically the one and only Adolf Hitler, created the car to invoke a sense of nationalism around the country. It was owned by the German government, and then they decided to name it Volkswagen Werk, V-E-R-K, which is translated to the People's Car Company. True or false? Next up, the state of Nevada was the first to issue licenses of self-driving cars. I'm going to share that with you again because it's a rather interesting one, isn't it? True or false? The state of Nevada was the first to issue licenses to self-driving cars. What do you think? True or false? That is true. And Nevada has been doing so since 2012. Since 2012. Next up for your true or false consideration is this: true or false? The inventor of cruise control was blind. True or false? The inventor of cruise control was blind. That's true. Cruise control was invented by a guy by the name of Ralph Teeter back in 1948, and he was blind. Amazing. Amazing. Next up is this: true or false? Close to 75% of all Rolls-Royce models ever produced are still on the road. True or false? Close to 75% of all Rolls-Royce models ever produced are still on the road. This is true. And guess what? Rolls-Royce has been making amazing cars since the early 1900s. Not sure if all of those ones are still on the road, but what an amazing car. True or false? In their final years of production, a Ford Model T took just 24 seconds to assemble. True or false? In their final years of production, a Ford Model T took just 24 seconds to assemble. Believe it or not, that is true. And it's true because it's thanks to an efficient and quick moving assembly line, actually assembly lines, and super efficient workers. Putting a Model T together was an amazingly quick task. It took just 24 seconds to assemble. Hopefully it lasted longer than that. Two more before we close. Here's the second to last true or false on our special automobile edition. True or false? Black is the most chosen color for new cars that are purchased around the world. True or false? Black happens to be the most chosen color for new cars that are purchased around the world. I thought that might be true, but it isn't. It is false because of a study that was done based on this question. And the study was done back in 2013. And the study found that white was the most popular color for new cars around the world, not black. And finally, we have this. True or false? Modern cars are made up of about 75,000 parts. True or false? Modern cars are made up of around 75,000 parts. That is false. Not so many parts. Modern cars are made up of around 30,000 parts, but still, that's a lot of parts. Anyway, we'd like to thank you for tuning into this episode of True or False. Stay tuned for future episodes of this weekly show here on Live Life Well TV. This has been Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host. Thank you for tuning in.